Want to welcome Kevin Kvalvik, and I'm going to turn it over to him so he can start us off to learn more about AI in higher ed and where we are.
Hey, thanks for being here, everybody. Before I really get underway proper, let me share that this space that I'm using right now for this presentation is the faculty media lab. Now this is down the first floor of the TED building, and basically it's for faculty. You sign up, you come in, you use it. It's yours. We have a chroma key area, which you can do slides, and then we have this area, which is the light board. The cool thing with the light board is if you don't have it set up with PowerPoint like I do in the background, and you just wanted to take notes, you could jot down notes as you go. Now, putting a light thing in front of me where I'm so light, I'd put them off to the side usually. But anyways, I'm just saying that is a great feature if you've ever seen it used and you lecture at a board. This is a glory. And if you have something that's a hard thing to sell, and you need students to be able to revisit it until they get it, this would be a great place to record that. So just think about that. Also, you could teach distance ed in here. If you had an online course, you could just sign up to be in here every Tuesday for an hour, or Tuesday and Wednesday, or whatever your class schedule is. So think about that. So with that said, I'm going to start. Basically, this is going to be about, and I got my little slides out of order because I wanted my Valentine's slide up. So for those of you who got the invitation earlier, I sent an invitation that looks like this, basically asking people to come. And I appreciate those people who have shown up, and then those people who can see it later. What I want, especially from, well, anybody who wants to weigh in, but people who are teaching right now, especially, it would be so good to hear your take on this, because what I want to do is continue a discussion. I don't say start a discussion, because Sarah and Steve really were sort of behind getting these AI series going. So this is going to be terrific. And Sarah, do me a big favor. And when I'm about 5 minutes out, let me know, because I tend to go long.
You got it.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so let's see here. What I want to do first of all is what AI doesn't do. What I want to do first of all is talk about my bona fides. Bona fides says right there. Basically, it is who you say you are. What kind of reason do you have to get up and talk in front of people? So I'm going to start my bona fides, because AI has none, but AI talks like it has a great deal of knowledge. It has access to knowledge, but no understanding. Okay, so my bona fides. I taught in a really backwoods rural middle school for about 4 years of my life, and I learned classroom management skills. And the students I had, a lot of them were like 16 and 7th grade. It was a hard school. And I'm telling you, if you do that for 4 years, you basically have that little sergeant stripe the rest of your life. Okay. And then I ran a business where I built a lot of proprietary technology and media, really, for Pearson and well, actually, all the major publishers. So I've done that. And then I was a teaching fellow at Harvard for a little while. And I say that because some of the stuff I'm going to be leaning on today is those guys, and they're good at what they do. But really, if you're an instructor and you taught in that middle school, or you were a teaching fellow at Harvard with all these bright people, it's still the same idea in your head. The task, the way you work is maybe going to be a little different. But really, the goal, the object is that you care about people and you want to serve. So I'll just start with that in terms of bona fides as we start working through here. And basically that was also, introducing the speaker. If I was with a crowd that didn't know me, I would always want to come out and say, hey, here's why you should listen to me. AI doesn't do that. Okay. And then now we're going to be discussing a paper I've written, because I'm trying to do this sort of like a conference where you have a paper, everyone read the paper, then they come in and then you present about the paper. Now, we haven't done that, and discussing text is sometimes a bore. I love it. I love a close read. My favorite thing about literature when I was in school was just digging into it and talking about I just was such a joy to find that was possible. All right. So of course, back to Valentine's. And that was I made for my mom with the beautiful thing that Laura Simmons made in the bottom of a patent. Okay, let's pretend though that I want to also model and be very meta and sort of model what I do as an instructor. I will generally start semesters in a class with what I call permission giving, where I ask groups of people to speak up. And I said, I want you to speak. And then if I'm not getting that, I'll get 5 students or 4 or 5 students every class. And I'll say, you 4 or 5 are assigned to ask meaningful questions. And I'm taking notes. And then the next class, 4 or 5. And what happens is that seems more organic. But it also, the little quiet person who doesn't want to look because they've been laughed at before for interrupting class, you're giving them permission, but you also are insisting that people who want to just sort of disappear are not allowed to. Now, with that, in this, once again, this is just sort of meta. You don't have to do this, but for us, I would like each of you to ask a couple of questions, and feel free to interrupt. And that's another rule in all my classes. I'm just there for you. Interrupt anytime you want, and the more give and take there is, the more interesting it is, because the people are asking questions, even if there are dumb questions. Even if they're dumb questions, the rest of the students sort of get a sense of what's going on. So, this is just sort of a common introduction, and I don't want to waste your time, but that's sort of how this is. But what this isn't today, because I've done an AI thing on the arts, and I did one on how to use it in a class space. This isn't that. This is the other side of that, where I've gone through and I've done a bunch of reading, and I've sort of zeroed in on one session that I'll be talking about today, about what colleges are doing with AI right now, a year or 2 years in. And a lot of people really, I think, are getting your head wrapped around what the advantages and what some of the problems are with it. Okay, so what I hope to cover is I'm going to go into some detail on, things that these schools are saying, hey, this is working, or this is something you really need to think about it as it applies to higher ed. And with that, we're going to talk a little bit about how it impacts our day-to-day and how can we make the existence of this stuff fair to students. I was told when I had a theater program that you want to be really careful about leaving the ladder sitting out in the middle of the stage, because students want to climb a ladder. That's an irresistible temptation. So they have more irresistible temptations with this, which we'll be discussing about today. And really, I want to get your feedback on what you think is the benefit. What do you think is the problem as we sort of think of what it's doing for our students? And then if they don't know what out of bounds is, well, then, they're probably going to be out of bounds part of the time. Okay, so I have a link that I'll put in right now. That oddly didn't work for me because it said I needed to change it. But if I can figure out where chat is, I'll tell you what, I'll just send it to you guys later, because I don't want to get distracted because I've got all this monitor configuration I haven't played with before. Okay. So let's talk about the new normal now that this AI thing exists. And now we now live in a slightly different world than we did a couple of years ago. And the survey, Eric Weinero was speaking on this, and I've taken some of his stuff sort of blatantly here rather than do a lot of research myself, talking about just a national poll that had gone out, and 36% of these college-age students said they had used generative AI for school already. And that was, this was 6 months ago now. And then within that group, 55% admitted using it for cheating, essentially, as they understood cheating. And, we won't get into great detail on that, but we're going to say somebody needs to, and it's you. In your class, you have to determine what that is. And then 12% didn't know if they had cheated or not. Now, these polls are sort of coin toss, but that rings true to me that, well, if I'm having to clean up my language, is that fine? And the other thing I'd mention is that I consider this an older sibling. Anything that you assign students, that if they have an older sibling and the older sibling could be doing the work and they could be bringing it in, it's the same thing. If we give assignments that people can work on with their siblings, well, we don't really know what they do. And you'll also hear, or at least in some of the stuff I have read, another perspective that's really good is there's a whole lot of students who are sort of mad about this, who themselves had studied hard, and they're ready to show that they know what they're doing, and they're ready to have, they're ready to basically compete in the market of ideas. But with this, they're feeling a little gypped because now everyone will say, oh, you had this other tool. Okay, so let's talk. I'm going to give a sports analogy, and I want to be careful not to take up too much time, but this is, I think, a nice way of thinking about it. When someone expressed it, I thought, well, that makes sense to me. Because we had this thing where 100 years ago, there's this guy named Charles Hoff who did this amazing thing. He jumped 14 feet. Look at that. That is Charles jumping in 1823. And he goes 14 feet up, and that is spectacular. Now, with that said, he was landing on, sand. So it's a tough sell. But what happened is people started getting stronger over time. And then after a little while that we got stronger and stronger over 100 years, we can now go 20 feet in the air, like Armand Duplantis, who did this just recently. And I'm rounding up for these 14 feet and 20 feet. And you're thinking, well, how can that happen? Of course, we know what happened. The world changed. All these little hardwood poles that were great for jumping over dikes or whatever improved. And when that improved, Armand isn't cheating. Armand went 20 feet, which is something significantly higher. He's now landing on a cushion, and he's also using this bendy pole. So there's a 43% improvement. And that is just the technology. Armand is not cheating. The rules changed because the equipment changed. Now, just because I'm a sports person, people who know me are laughing. I will point out also another sports analogy for the 43% improvement that happened in 100 years. If we look back to, say, the 100-meter dash, Paddock, 100 years ago, Paddock won the 100-meter dash, and he went 9.58 seconds. Usain Bolt did it in 10.4 seconds 100 years later. That's less than a second's difference. People aren't actually getting stronger over time. Instead, we have equipment and we have other tools that make it work. Now, I will point out, though, I asked, this was an AI research question for me because I don't do math. That made, if they were running together, Bolt would have been 20 feet ahead of him at the end of that 100-meter dash. Anyway, so that's a setup to think about. Is this a fair question? Is it reasonable to think that the way we think now is going to be fundamentally changed from now on, and this is an improvement? I'm going to start with that right there. What do you think? And just turn on your mic and say stuff. You don't have to raise your hand or anything.
So feel free to put things in the chat. Feel free to take yourself off mute. Kevin wants to know what we think.
Hey, Kev, it's Jen.
Hey, Jen.
I'll just add that this was a conversation that I had with my 11 o'clock class today. They're writing summaries of academic research that they've done. So this is really relevant. And we talked about the rules changing. And I find that I think I know my students are going to be using, right, ChatGPT or something to write these summaries. Some of them are, some of them are not. I've tried to create some rules, but with the use of Grammarly and then the more explicit AI generated text, it's really hard to make clear rules. So I found myself today kind of purposely being vague, which is not a safe place for students. So I appreciate you talking about this.
Thanks, JPR. Anybody else want to sort of weigh in early on? Because we're going to be marching into this. There'll be lots of times for you to basically address that. The last thing I'll say on this sort of precursor to our discussion is the Luddites, of course, in England 200 years ago now, when the textile mills came on and all the people who did the weaving, they protested, and there was, these giant fights, and it was like General Ludd was the guy who's the leader. It turns out that's why they're Luddites. And if you know this part of history, it's fascinating because, they saw this technology was going to kick them all out of their jobs, and they were right. If I can't feed my family, am I going to burn down the mill? Well, maybe I will. So understand the pushback on technology isn't necessarily ill-founded. But how much can we do? And I really, as we go through, I'm just trying to get us sort of thinking about this to sort of figure it out from there. So now, The paper I have, and like I said, I'll give you a link to these. I'm going to be pulling out sections of just the comments that I made, but moreover, we're going to see an 8-minute video and of part of this discussion with the Harvard College, basically, and what these different people were sharing. And yeah, I hope you see value in that. But what we're going to be doing basically is these are going to be talking points for us to discuss as much as can be done in the time we have. And this is, as I said earlier, a close read, which like I said, people who don't like talking about literature, I get that. You know, I've got family members who can't stand it, but this gives me joy. Okay, I will start out when we're talking about the Harvard College group that have been influencing this. I did a lot of reading around it and just thought I'm just going to zero in on my people. That the person who's leading a lot of this work in this disruptive technology is Dr. Amanda Kvalvik. And like I said, you can read the paper later, but she's the dean of the undergraduate college. I mean, they are really putting this really up front. This is really important. This is going to change how school works. Same thing they did with online learning several years ago when MIT and Harvard were the two leaders in online learning. You may not know that, but they just had more visits and a whole bunch more because they just opened all these classes for free. So this is important stuff. And I would just argue that every college should have leadership really in the weeds saying, okay, what do we think about this? What are our policies? What are our norms? And primarily norms is what we've been looking at. So I'm going to start out with my primary takeaway, because we may not get through much of this today. But my primary takeaway was the reading and the study I've done talked about people in given domains found that this was a remarkable tool. If you are a programmer, I know Dan has, probably, is going over the moon about how much this can advance that, and that you can speak about what you want a program to do rather than using computer language. The computer had to learn our language, which is sort of cool. But so in that domain, it's amazing. If you're doing math, I mean, dang, calculators stop people from knowing the inside out of math. So you get my point. It varies so much by domain. Is this a boon or a curse? Experienced learners might see these tools as a boon. And it just read it again and again, where these people who are the top of their field, who AI could write some stuff and do some research for them, they could glance at it in a second and see what the crap was, because they're experts. The fact is, though, that's just so. For a lot of fields, this is going to be spectacular. And what it can do for productivity in the workplace is also spectacular. That's not today's topic. But then novice learners. It's an entirely different game, because now, it's so easy to present as though you know something that your sibling is writing. So the novice learner has an entirely different issue and the barriers that they have, because AI is necessarily sloppy, utterly confident, a declarative manner of communicating, and it is more than error prone. It is just, and the video clip we're going to see in a minute, that gentleman writes on this same topic, saying how remarkably administrative and bad the writing is, because it doesn't have a concept of voice. It has 100 boring voices that it glums together with a fair amount of big words. So this difference between experienced learners and novice learners is the concern. And then anthropomorphically understood, when people interact with this, it is hard not to sort of give it a personality. It's like if you ever buy a dog and you have it for a week, and I bought a dog a week before my son moved in with me. Not naming the dog was impossible, but I would say the same thing's true of AI. What happens is we basically understand that as a human can be understood, as though it's being vetted at some level by a thinking expert of good faith, and that's why I opened with vetting. This doesn't have any good faith. It doesn't understand truth. There is no truth to it. So it is utterly a sociopath. And they can't program in what we got by thousands of years of our DNA. And then finally, it's probabilistic, which means it deals in the worlds of probabilities. Hey, this might be so, this could be possible, maybe this isn't, and it never has an idea of fact. So just understand, that's one of my whining points in this. Now we're going to go to the TV break here. And like I said, it's 8-minute video. This is a gentleman speaking to this group, and I've gone through hours and hours and hours of this. This guy just says a lot of stuff, I think, very well, and it's worth hearing about. And then after he's done, I'm going to ask you guys to comment on what you think about that. And what I'm going to do here, and it's not like I don't know how to do this, because I do. You watch how I'm going to share a screen, and I'm going to tell it I want to have the audio on. And this, my TV is about 15 feet in front of me, just, share sound, and I'm going to choose a media player if I can identify it with my bad eyesight. Media player, come on. iPhone, I can do iPhone. I'm going to have to actually, this is embarrassing, but I got to walk up here to see this. It's the first time I've used the room, and I'm finding that this is potentially a problem. Why am I not seeing? Okay. I'll pull that up just the same here. And it's also, I never use Zoom. With my class, I'm always using, there it is, media player. Let's see if it's going to work on your side. Hey, Sarah, are you guys seeing the media player?
We are.
Okay, great.
Yep.
It's going to be an ongoing conversation. We're very eager at the Bach Center to help support you, host those conversations, help you think through what it might mean for you as an individual or as a department to integrate AI into your teaching in an effective and responsible way that's going to communicate to students the things that we want them to learn. So as you can see behind me, I've just got 3 kind of high-level points I wanted to talk about before handing it over to some other colleagues who will get down into some specific examples of integrating AI into your teaching. So you can see the first one, talk directly and specifically with students about how your assignments are meant to work. Second, disaggregate process from product and try to render that process visible. And third, to create opportunities for students to reflect on and talk about their work. So I just have a few comments about each of those. So the first one about talking directly with students, I think really echoes something that Amanda said. We also have a lot of conversations with students at the Bach Center, and I would say that our students are, by and large, really not looking for opportunities to cheat, to take shortcuts. They are just as concerned, in fact, in some cases, more concerned perhaps than we are, to determine the ethical and responsible use of AI. And I think we can really capitalize on that. I think we can kind of co-create some of these norms with our students. Because I think, as Amanda said, I think the real challenges that these tools pose are not that students are suddenly going to become prolific cheaters, but rather that it's going to make it really hard for some of our very conscientious, our very scrupulous students to figure out where exactly the boundary is, in some cases, between seeking help, brainstorming for ideas, searching for citations, trying to get a sense of what kind of voice is appropriate for writing in a certain genre. I mean, these are very legitimate, important questions that we want students to explore. We want them to explore them with each other in the dining hall. And so I think for students who want to explore them with AI, they may have a difficult time sometimes knowing where the boundary is between doing that kind of exploration and, on the other hand, soliciting an unacceptable degree of assistance when they're completing their assignments. I think the other big challenge is that we know that Harvard students already, even before the advent of AI, could be sometimes a bit suspicious of each other, right? They might think, I have a lot of integrity, I would never cheat on an assignment, but some other element of students out there may be cheating on an assignment. And so I think it is a real challenge for us to make sure that even the students who really do have a lot of integrity or are deeply thoughtful about these issues don't become sort of jaded or kind of disinvest from the system because they suspect that it's not a level playing field. So talking to your students about what you want them to learn, about how completing your assignments on their own will really help them practice those things, will help them learn those things, and about whether employing various kinds of assistance from AI, whether that's consonant with those goals or not, I think it will go a long way toward narrowing those kind of problematic use cases that you might be worried about. And so on this note, I'll just say to make sure that when you do insert those policy pronouncements into your syllabus, into your Canvas site, when you talk about them in the first lecture, I think it's important to make sure that students know that They are, in a sense, the first word in the conversation, the opening salvo in what I hope will be an ongoing conversation with students. It may be that students discover a way they could use AI in your course that isn't clearly covered by one of your policy pronouncements, and you want them to come and talk to you about it, right? You want to have an intelligent, calm conversation about those insofar as it's possible before a student goes astray, right, rather than afterwards. So my second point about disaggregate process from product, I think even prior to the advent of AI, student writing was probably too often a black box in our courses, right? We distribute the assignment prompt, and then a few weeks later, students submit a final product, and we don't exactly know what has happened in between those two things. The challenge there is, by default, that turns every decision that a student makes into a high-stakes decision, right? Into a high-stakes proposition. If they go astray 2 weeks before the assignment's due and we don't know that that's happening, we don't know where exactly, those two things. The challenge there is, by default, that turns every decision that a student makes into a high-stakes decision, right? Into a high-stakes proposition. If they go astray 2 weeks before the assignment's due and we don't know that that's happening, we don't know where exactly. Was it when they came up with their thesis statement? Was it when they chose which sources to examine? Then it means that all we can do is kind of clean up whatever's happened with the final product. And that in some cases might mean an academic honesty proceeding. If we know, on the other hand, what students are doing in each stage in the process, if we're giving them frequent feedback, we know what they're doing in preliminary assignments like project proposals. They submit a list of their analytical questions, annotated bibliographies, and they give us a brief source analysis exercise. If we know what they're doing on each step of the process, and we see that they go astray somewhere, or they're proceeding in their work in a way that we think violates kind of the spirit of the assignment, we can give them that feedback in a low-stakes teaching way, right, rather than in a sort of legalistic way that they violated some norm or policy. And I think the extra work that this will take to be collecting some of these preliminary assignments, giving students more feedback on their drafts, I think is really vastly offset by the gains that students will actually make in the proficiency of their writing, because they're getting this coaching and feedback along the way. And last but not least, my third point about creating opportunities for students to reflect and talk about their work. I think so long as students are submitting their final written work to a single reader, that is the instructor, and they imagine that probably that reader will never really ask them again about what they've written in the paper, it's kind of a one-shot transaction, it may feel to them like leaning on generative AI is sort of a safe or even a victimless indiscretion, right? It helped me write the paper, but no one's ever going to talk to me about this paper, so it's sort of okay in a sense, right? If, however, students realize that they may have many readers, right? That they have a sort of responsibility to a community of readers in the class or even beyond the classroom. And if, moreover, they feel like those readers might actually ask them questions about how they arrived at that opinion, what they think the implications of that opinion are, what they would do next with the conclusions that they've come to in their writing, then I think suddenly the value proposition of outsourcing their thought to a large language model goes way down, right? Because now someone's asking them, well, how did you come to this idea? And they don't really have a compelling answer to that. So I think that insofar as you can think about your writing assignments as in some ways the first step in a conversation where students get to reflect on their process, peer review, talk to each other, I think it will go a long way toward helping students appreciate that there really is value to that sweat equity. It's going to be an ongoing conversation.
Okay. And with that, I would like to hear what you have to say about this gentleman. I found this one of the most clearly spoken and articulated opinion that I heard along the way, and it goes really to what JPR was sharing earlier. Let's see, there we go. So he talked about high stakes choices that fall to students because, you know, if they make this indiscretion at the wrong time, it's the course, if you're in a certain school, you might, lose your reputation, et cetera. So it's really important that we do have some kind of clarity in what we think, and also it's a communication. It's not a transaction. And there's a distinction. So a couple of you, please share your thoughts, and don't go short.
This is Lisa.
Hey, Lisa.
I love the idea of frequent preliminary assignments and feedback. You know, that would enable us to determine really whether or not they have original thoughts and not ones that have been acquired, you know, through AI, starting from the very beginning, those rough drafts and all of the thinking exercises that go into it. That is a wonderful decision for teachers. But one thing that I do have a hard time with, because students, even from middle school, are trained on what plagiarism is. And he did, in other words, talk about the fact that, or the proposition that many don't understand the boundary between cheating and doing their own work. I do have a hard time with that idea. Because we really train them in English anyway, and ENG 111. From then through 112, we train them on what plagiarism is, and AI plagiarism is so tempting for them. And I would propose that they do understand what the difference is. And I think the data bears that out.
Do you think what he's describing sounds like it's really going to add a lot of work to people who already have a big course load?
All of the preliminary assignments, when you're teaching a lot of the English classes and they're heavy, they really do require a lot of grading. Then yes, it could add extra to the course load. To a 40-hour
Does anybody
week,
else have an opinion on what cheating looks like?
I'm sorry?
I was just asking anybody else that wanted to comment on what you said, because how does that impact people, and what is or isn't cheating? Has the bar moved on that?
Kevin, if I could speak, this is Sarah. I'm interested in seeing where we consider the line with cheating as we start to see more and more generative AI assistants in the world outside of the academic classroom, right? I think as a community college, we're very uniquely positioned because we have students currently working full time and being told, you better be using AI for that. And so there's a lot of support for using AI for efficiency's sake. And I think that we're going to start, especially because I've already heard, I've heard from colleagues at other institutions that their college license for Grammarly, for example, now triggers AI detection on every student paper because Grammarly's already got so much AI built into it, right? So some of the AI's invisibility in the coming weeks and months, and some of the market or the workplace's use of AI, I think both of them are going to be very influential and will probably have us rethinking it in the academic space.
Right. Hey, Sarah, did something show up in chat? Because I can't see that.
Yes, thank you for noticing. Joan asked, what about creative writing courses where citations and bibliography are not necessarily required? How do you police the use of AI in creative writing? Great question, Joan.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the fact that there aren't set answers. I've got some stuff that we're going to come to in a minute that does give some strategies on top of that. So, I've got my opinions, but really they're just that. But let's wander into a couple more of these. Now, what I've done is I've taken different clips for some of the different authors and some of the different sessions and that I referenced in the paper. The paper I have is only like a couple, 2 or 3 pages long with just the summary items, and then it has a breakout really of about 5 different individual suggestions from that session, and and I pulled out some of the best of those just to make it manageable. But let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of those. For what Adam just said, students find themselves making these high-stake choices again. If instructors are casual or non-specific in their assignments and practice, then it really is unfair to the student. And as he also pointed out, as I mentioned at the outset, good students and students who really are confident, who really, are here to, for certain purposes that are, sort of the qualified or the real high-end learners that we have, they do see it sort of as a potential compromise. So Jillian Pierce, who's the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education, shared a handful of things. I just want to get your take on these. There's 7 of these. So she's talking about rethinking existing assignments. She teaches a writing course, so I appreciate the question. She goes, how do we do this? Well, what if you tried to personalize the assignment more? This is number 1. And make students include their own experiences or observations, and then use really current events, something that like just happened, because AI's knowledge base is so limited in that. So those are some workarounds that I loved, because, especially if you're talking to the student as well as, having read their material, if they say this was their experience, and you ask them to tell me more about that happening, you're going to know pretty fast if that was a little fiction that somebody else made up. Okay, here's number 2, building assignments in phases. I love this idea, where the completion is in steps. So you're guiding students through these different parts of the process. And for novice learners, they might need more hand-holding anyway. And that's why I was asking Lisa that question. Does this mean teaching has just gotten 10 times harder? Because, oh yeah, now I got to visit with everybody along the way. I'm only one person. So I'm not sure how I feel about that. I know that the situation in their undergrad, is they've got not only some terrific instructors with smaller classes, but they also have teaching fellows. So lots of luck with that. But also ensuring their engagement, because you are guiding them and you work with them. I love both those concepts as sort of a first stop there. Let's see, before I proceed with that, does anybody see an element within their domain that would be appropriate? I don't know if Dan, I know that the kind of stuff you do isn't like a lot of creative writing, but would you see this as the kind of thing you could basically use also in your realm?
Yeah, and you're correct. Outside of the fact that our intro class actually has a lot of those writing skills that we reinforce, so that's something we have in common with the rest of the college, with like the English department, et cetera. But with regards to using it in some of our more technical classes, it's nice because you can get a second or third re-explaining of a particular concept. The 7-layer OSI model, and maybe the book it didn't click with you, so you can go to and I have actually used it in that capacity when I'm preparing my lesson plans and whatnot. It's like there's a lot of information. It's like, well, what was that again? So I would encourage the students. Have I done a lot of that? Absolutely, I have not. But I know that that it would be a useful thing to do, to actually say, hey, get an explanation on some of these technical concepts. And
great, thanks so much, Dan.
Sure.
Does anybody else have something along these lines, where breaking an assignment into phases? So you're sort of, it's a one-off, it isn't like the black box of writing the paper that Adam described earlier. Elijah, what kind of stuff do you do? Because I know that you're conscious of this.
There's not a lot of writing in accounting. It's mostly mathematical calculations and formulas. We do have a few writing assignments, But other than that, like I said, there's not much writing that we actually do in the accounting sphere of things.
Right. Well, since they're learning incrementally, how do you break things up into phases and steps already automatically within accounting? Because I know it goes from, fairly simple stuff to fairly complex stuff, right?
Yeah, the way that it's already structured and the way it's been structured forever is accounting is broke up into, accounting always builds upon itself. We have our base block of the accounting equation, and then everything that we do builds upon that base block that they learn in the very first accounting class. So everything is already set up in a
Okay.
way that it builds upon each other.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Elijah. I'm going to go to the next couple. And like there's 7 of these, and they're all listed in the paper that the link I'll send you guys afterwards. And Sarah, it's a shared folder, but you probably wouldn't be able to see it. I just, like I said, I don't want to spend time looking and doing that. I have it in front of me, but
I'll
okay.
see if I can find it and throw it in the chat before the end of the
Yeah,
session.
if you do, just the whole folder that has that information in it would be nice. And if not, then we can definitely do it after the fact. So
Great.
here's a couple more. Reflecting on processes and decision making. So reflecting within a writing context, but really anything you're doing. If it's like I'm thinking of Ben's classes where the students are coming up with these pitches and all. So reflecting on the process and decision making in that. As they reflect on their learning and the decision-making process. And this could be achieved by, say, asking students to explain their choices and challenges. And I love that as a concept, especially for, like I said, Ben, with a pitch, having, sort of getting underneath, where that came from is great. And then I'll go to the next one. And now, Ben, I know you're on iPhone, so you may not even be able to join us here, but if you can, what are your thoughts?
It's kind of interesting. I've got a foot in both worlds. We have stuff that is analytical and there's a right and wrong answer, and you have to have some understanding to come up with things like organization structure and the logic behind why you chose an LLC versus an S corporation. And they have to do some research to do that. They can do it through AI. They can do it through the textbook. And so I can have steps in the learning process where students can divulge where they learn things, but then as we progress, we tend to get more creative. Like the business pitch becomes it very much as a creative storytelling exercise. The business plan can be a little bit of the analytical, and you had to do research on it, and so they would have had to have pulled that from somewhere. But we also want them to be unique and different and explain why they have that point of differentiation, and that's creative. And so I'm trying to encourage students to use AI, but to report it out so that they get into the habit of using it and referencing it and having the benefit of it. But then also to the conversation on plagiarism, making sure they let people know where their information came from. So there's never this claim of you stole this from somewhere or you copied it from somewhere. I've got a foot in both worlds, and we do have the opportunity to kind of build it up. As our classes go along, we kind of move from building blocks to being more creative.
That's great. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I can see that. And also this next one informs both you and I'm thinking about Kelly here, where she's saying, not Kelly, but the author, evaluating alternative forms of assessment. She goes down to say better capture of critical thinking and learning outcomes. But then she goes down to say also include oral presentations, multimedia projects, text animations, and that type of thing. And I know that in education, a lot of these students are being taught to create, basically a whole wealth of ways to instruct, and their practice of what they're going to do later would clearly, might include even more oral, multimedia and text animations, that kind of thing. Kelly, would you mind if your mic's working? And then you may not be able to, but if you can, would you like to share a thought on that?
So many of my advisees are coming back to school after being out for 20 or plus years. So how will all this affect them? Like, because they're not going to really be knowledgeable about a lot of this.
Yeah, I hear you. I was thinking about that, and then I know with Ben's stuff too, that, you know, these students are having to do that. And the nice thing is if you do have this oral presentation part of anything, even if it's not a speech class, and it could be, you know, engineering, literally, where people are explaining things to each other, and that kind of thing, when people are you know, basically asked to explain this or that to one another, it's remarkably helpful. And then the other part of that is learners teaching learners. That peer-to-peer instruction, I just really dig that. And that's another thing that if people lean on that more heavily, I consider that's very often probably going to be a win as well. So 3 last ones, and then we're going to pretty much wrap up. I'm just trying to make sure that we're that anybody has some further ideas on this, let me know. One of the things she points out too is reevaluating the grading criteria. So basically, she mentioned the potential to reevaluate grading criteria to ensure they accurately reflect the learning objectives. And so it isn't just, you know, you get this, this, and this, but really the grading criteria includes, you know, these other face-to-face interactions. They include more of sort of a give and take. And one of the things that I write about in general is that if you see education as a transaction where you're a student, you're paying your tuition, you're coming in, you're giving them what they ask, they give you back that degree. And if that concept of education, then you really, and of course we all know, but the students often do not, that you're just missing the boat. You know, really what you're here for is to get your system of knowing, is for you to acquire some skills and understand a practice and understand a field. And none of that is just a transaction. All of that's communication, all of that's relational. And then incorporating peer review. And we all know that sometimes this is tricky. But if I were, you know, Darlene, you know, who's no longer here outside, but if I was in cosmetology, you know, that back and forth and that one-on-one instruction is so vital in there. Now, you know, can you use AI in cosmetology? Well, probably not. But there's still, you know, if there's written work or those kind of activities, engaging and using that for some of those, you know, I don't know. That's just off the top of my head. And then I'm going to say the last thing, and really anybody else, I'd love to get some final thoughts on where you are in the process, because all we're doing is saying, you know, there's a lot to think about here, but it does necessarily change our day to day. And it is, you know, on how I work already, and I find it terrific. But going back to another thing that you'll see shared in the paper is the administrative, terrible, boring tone that I've already mentioned here that AI puts out really encourages people to write grammatically dull sentences. You know, it's just formulaic and really just voiceless. So lastly, exploring generative AI in writing assignments, integrating AI into writing assignments in ways that enhance learning. This includes AI output as an objective critique. So you're asking it to generate something, and then you're talking about why it's not good. Another thing I share in the paper is people who teach literature and whatnot, and I know Jen is about this, you know, just, you know, what's a beautiful metaphor? Well, I'm guaranteeing you a computer doesn't know that. So when the students were in one of these classes he was describing, he was asking them to challenge AI to write something and to make a metaphor of this or that, and then they were talking about, well, what is good poetry? What is good art? And I found that fascinating. And JPR, do you have any thoughts on that here? I'm sorry to call you out again.
No, I appreciate the question, and I will say that the types of assignments you just mentioned, having them be more creative, that's one of the positive influences of this upsurge of AI for me, because I'm finding I teach primarily seated classes and I like it that way. And I'm having them do more short handwritten work right now. So I really appreciate that this whole phenomenon has gotten me back to taking handwritten work, because I find that I'm teaching more voice right now, and I'm asking them to write about their own voices more. trying to, outsmart this AI generated text. And I feel like the students are more engaged. So this has been because of my emphasis on, hey, we really need to emphasize the personal here, because so many people are using the AI generated text to create, like you said, really boring, overly general writing with no voice. So we're starting to point out the problems with the AI generated text, and I think they are enjoying that because then they are feeling the creative spark with their own voices.
Great, thanks so much. Lisa, did you have anything else after hearing a little bit more on this that where you want to weigh in on what your thoughts are?
I have been doing something similar to Jennifer, actually. I have been doing more handwritten work, but I've also been using Respondus in concert with Turnitin.com. And I have been very pleased by how well our students can write and think on their own without help thinking. I've been very pleased. In fact, I even have this one paper that we write. I have them bring in an article, a peer-reviewed article, and they're allowed to use that during this writing time. So they can even use research as a part of that assignment. So it's possible to get pretty creative and implement assignments that well, we wouldn't have had to think of this before AI,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, good.
I
sure
would like
appreciate
to
that.
come back to workload, Kevin. You
Please.
mentioned, I think, and I think it was in the video too, the sense of with additional preliminary assignments, the extra work. It's not just that, it's having to redo assignments. I mean, we're having to recreate many assignments very quickly. And that is what I'm finding my priority right now. So what happens then is feedback takes longer to get back to students when you have as many students as we do. So I'm hoping, that there is administrative consideration for the mass amount of rewriting of assignments that needs to happen right now.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. One of the things when I was instructing full time that would bother me, we would have these really inspired guest speakers come in at intervals and tell us all the stuff you could do if you could be precious about every student. And it was like, I've got bus duty, and I wasn't crying because I didn't love my job, but people sometimes have all this wonderful ideas that if you really don't have a family and if you really have lots and lots of spare time, yeah, you can do that, but damn, that's not sustainable. It's just so hard. So I really appreciate the honesty there, just saying, yeah, here's I'll use the tool. Here's what I'm doing. This is my best, but I can't do my best, and I can't do my best, every single thing I've got for a year. Here's what I can sustain, and I find that that's more reasonable. And I will close with one last thing that's a little off topic, but there is a technical solution that will exist in the near future. And I go on about this a lot, and Dan Rickert knows this well too, as I know Jamie does, that some of the early hacks that they would do, what they would do was they would put a little piece of program that kept up with your keyboard, and every single key that was clicked, it would all be recorded so that later someone could go in and find out everything you were typing. And it's a really simple hack. Well, why doesn't ProctorTrack have that already? Why doesn't, Turnitin have that, where not only is the camera on, but then there's just a little record of they're actually typing this information. And that pretty much fixes it in terms of just blatant copying, because you can't cut and paste like that. So I would think for a lot of these things, no one's imaginative on the low level cheating. The more difficult stuff, that's actually worth our time to think about. And I just want to wrap with saying that, I really do find that there is a lot of promise that this could help students if we're really diligent. And that this is, I really feel this is a game changer though. And I've been talking to different people, I have different opinions on how much of a change it is, but we'll see. I really appreciate you guys being here today and coming in and sitting through this. And just please share with us, when we send that email with the link to the papers. And I'd love to get more feedback. And like I said, this isn't a conversation we're starting because this has been going on since this AI project started here. So Sarah, any closing thoughts?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for being on the call and for your participation in the great discussion. And especially thanks to Kevin again for his thoughtfulness and providing us with these considerations. We're going to continue to talk about this. I hope that you're able to continue to attend our sessions or watch the recordings. We've got another one coming up at the end of the month with a guest speaker from Brevard College, very similar role to the role that Kevin and I have here at Blue Ridge. And he's going to be talking about the ways he's using AI in his everyday tasks to support faculty. So that's going to be an interesting session as well. We will send you an email with some links to Kevin's work. And I've already put a link in the chat for the evaluation. So please give us your feedback on today so that we can continue to provide high quality sessions for you. Thanks so much. Hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thanks,
care.
bye.
Thanks, Kevin.